Today our topic is an introduction and study of the armed forces of the United States and the history and command structure of the military. The armed forces are also called the military forces. It consists of Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and Coast Guard. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and forms military policy with the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and Federal Executive Departments, which have to act as the principal organs by which military policy is carried out. All 6 armed services are among the 8 uniformed services of the United States. There are separate marks of the U.S. Armed Forces service branches. This army was firstly founded on June 14, 1775, almost 245 years ago. The service branches are U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. Coast Guards. The headquarters of the United States Army is the Pentagon, Arlington County, and Virginia. If we eye on the commander of the armed forces and the leadership command, the President is the Commander-in-Chief. Now, at this time, the Secretary of Defense is Mark Esper, and Commander-in-Chief is the Donald Trump, and Secretary of Homeland Security is Chad Wolf, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark A. Milley, and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John E. Hyten, and Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman, SEAC Roman Colon Lopez. To be recruited in the U.S. Army, the eligibility is the military age, that is 17-year-old, but with the parental consent, you can be recruited. And 18 years for voluntary service. Conscription, male only, and inactive since 1973. Available military service, 17 million, age 18 to 25. Reaching military 2 million, 2016. Active personnel 13,82,922 and ranked 3rd. Reserve personnel 8,49,450 and deployed personnel 1,65,000. If we see the budget, the $738 billion in 2020 is exhausted, and it ranked 1st. And percent of the GDP, that is 3.42% in 2019, the exhaustive GDP. And industry of the military, that is listed in domestic suppliers. A bird's eye view on the history of wars which America has fought. We can say it list of engagements: American Revolutionary War, Whiskey Rebellion, Indian Wars, Barbary Wars, War of 1812, Patriot War, Mexican-American War, Utah War, Cortina Troubles, Reform War, American Civil War, New York City draft riots, Las Cuevas War, Spanish-American War, Banana Wars, Philippine-American War, Boxer Rebellion, Border War, World War I, Russian Civil War, World War II, Cold War, Puerto Rican nationalist revolts, Korean War, 1958 Lebanon crisis, Dominican Civil War, Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam War, Korean DMZ conflict, Operation Eagle Claw, and Multinational Forces Lebanon, Invasion of Grenada, Operation Golden Pheasant, Invasion of Panama, Persian Gulf War, Somali Civil War, Operation Gothic Serpent, Battle of Mogadishu, Bosnian War, Operation Deliberate Force, Operation Deny Flight, Kosovo War, Operation Allied Force, Global War on Terrorism, Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, in Philippines, Horn of Africa, and Trans-Sahara, Iraq War, intervention against ISIL, war in northwest Pakistan, military deployment after Hurricane Katrina, Pakistan-United States skirmishes, and many others. The ranks and position of the armed forces officers we can understand: the Army officer, Marine Corps officer, Navy officer, Air Force officer, Space Force officer, Coast Guard officers. These are included in the commissioned officers. They are called the commissioned officers. And second, the warrant officers. In ranks, Army warrant officer, Marine Corps warrant officer, Navy warrant officer, Air Force warrant officer, Coast Guard warrant officer, and some other also enlisted: Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and Coast Guards. If we touch some pages of history, we can acquire some information from the time of its inception. The United States Armed Forces played a decisive role in the history of the United States. A sense of national unity and identity was forged as a result of victory in the First Barbary War and the Second Barbary War. It played a critical role in the American Civil War, continuing to serve as the armed forces of the United States, although a number of its officers resigned to join the separatist military of the Confederate States. The National Security Act of 1947, adopted following World War II, created the modern U.S. military framework. The act established the National Military Establishment, headed by the Secretary of Defense, and created the Department of the Air Force and the National Security Council. It was amended in 1949, renaming the National Military Establishment the Department of Defense, and merged the cabinet-level Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, and Department of the Air Force into the Department of Defense. The U.S. Armed Forces are one of the largest military forces in terms of personnel. It draws its personnel from a large pool of paid volunteers, although conscriptions has been used in the past. It has not been used since 1973. The selective service system retains the power to conscript males and requires that all male citizens and residents residing in the U.S. between the ages of 18 to 25 register with the service. The U.S. Armed Forces are considered the world's most powerful military. The military budget of the United States was $693 billion in 2019, the highest in the world. In 2018, that accounted for 36% of the world's defense expenditures. The U.S. Armed Forces has significant capabilities in both defense and power projection due to its large budget, resulting in advanced and powerful technologies, which enables a world-spread deployment of the force around the world, including around 800 military bases outside the United States. The U.S. Air Force is the world's largest air force. The U.S. Navy is the world's largest navy by tonnage, and the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps combined are the world's second largest air arm. In terms of size, the U.S. Coast Guard is the world's 12th largest maritime force. The U.S., as of fiscal year 2019, has about 14,061 aircraft in its military inventory. The history of the United States Armed Forces, if we see the glimpses of the history, the U.S. Armed Forces dates to 14 June 1775 with the creation of the Continental Army. Even before the Declaration of Independence marked the establishment of the United States, the Continental Navy, established on 13 October 1775, and Continental Marines, established on 10 November 1775, were created in close succession by the Second Continental Congress in order to defend the new nation against the British Empire in the American Revolutionary War. The forces demobilized in 1784 after the Treaty of Paris ended the war for independence. The Congress of the Confederation created the current United States Army on 3 June 1784. The United States Congress created the current United States Navy on 27 March 1794 and the current United States Marine Corps on 11 July 1798. All these services trace their origins to their respective continental predecessors. The 1787 adoption of the Constitution gave the Congress the power to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, and to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, as well as the power to declare war. The President is the U.S. Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief. The United States Coastal Guard traces its origin to the founding of the Revenue Cutter Service on 4 August 1790, which merged with the United States Life Saving Service on 28 January 1915 to establish the Coast Guard. The United States Air Force was established as an independent service on 18 September 1947. It traces its origin to the formation of the Aeronautical Division, U.S. Signal Corps, which was formed 1 August 1907 and was part of the Army, Air Force, before becoming an independent service as per the National Security Act of 1947. The United States Public Health Services Commissioned Corps was formally considered to be a branch of the United States Armed Forces from 29 July 1945 until its status as such was revoked on 3 July 1952. The United States Space Force was established as an independent service on 20 December 2019. It is the sixth branch of the U.S. military and the first new branch since the establishment of the independent U.S. Air Force in 1947. It traces its origin to the formation of the Air Force Space Command, which was formed 1 September 1982 and was a major command of the United States Air Force. The command structure we can understand under the command of the President. The U.S. Armed Forces is established by Article 2 in the Constitution, whereby the President is named Commander-in-Chief. In the same article, the Department of Defense, DoD, is headed by the Secretary of Defense, who is a civilian and a member of the Cabinet. The Defense Secretary is second in U.S. Armed Forces chain of command, with the exception of the Coast Guard, which is under the Secretary of Homeland Security and is just below the President and serves as the principal assistant to the President in all defense-related matters. Together, the President and the Secretary of Defense comprise the National Command Authority, which by law is the ultimate lawful source of military orders for the military services within the Defense Department. To coordinate military strategy with political affairs, the President has a National Security Council, headed by the National Security Advisor. The members of the National Security Council are the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, are in charge of the entire military establishment, maintaining civilian control of the military. So, too are each of the defense departments, constituted military departments, headed by civilians. The 5 DoD branches are organized into 3 departments, each with civilian heads. The Department of the Army is headed by the Secretary of the Army. The Department of the Navy is headed by the Secretary of the Navy. And the Department of the Air Force is headed by the Secretary of the Air Force. The Marine Corps is organized under the Department of the Navy, and Space Force is organized under the Department of the Air Force. However, they are still separate and equal services. The Coast Guard is under the Department of Homeland Security and receives its operational orders from the Secretary of Homeland Security. However, the Coast Guard may be transferred to the Department of the Navy by the President or Congress during a time of war, thereby placing it within the Defense Department. The President, Secretary of Defense, and other senior executive officials are advised by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is headed by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking officer in the United States military, and the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The rest of the body is composed of the heads of each of the Defense Department services branches. The Chief of Staff of the Army, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Chief of the Naval Operations, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and Chief of Space Operations, as well as the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Although the senior officer of a military branch, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, is not a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, despite being composed of the highest ranking officers in each of the respective branches, the Joint Chiefs of Staff does not possess operational command authority. Rather, the Goldwater Nichols Act charges them only with advisory power. Military forces perform operations as a part of joint unified combatant commands. Each of the unified combatant commands is headed by a combatant commander, a senior commissioned officer who exercises supreme command authority per 10 U.S.C. 164 over all of the forces, regardless of branch within their geographical or functional command. By statute, the chain of command flows from the President to the Secretary of Defense to each of the combatant commanders. In practice, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff often acts as an intermediary between the Secretary of Defense and the combatant commanders. The Goldwater Nichols Act, which gives us knowledge about giving charges to these all Chief of Staff of the Army and the Commandant of Marine Corps and Chief of the Naval Operations and Chief and all other chiefs as an advisory power. So we must have to get knowledge about the Goldwater Nichols Act. The Act of Goldwater Nichols, which was reorganized Act on October 4, 1986. It is called the Goldwater Nichols Department of Defense Act. It was signed by President Ronald Reagan. made the most sweeping changes to the United States Department of Defense since the department was established in the National Security Act of 1947. By reworking the command structure of the United States military, it increased the powers of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and implemented some of the suggestions from the Packard Commission, commissioned by President Reagan in 1985. This act has empowered the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all other chiefs of the military branches. It has implemented some of the suggestions from the Packard Commission, commissioned by President Reagan. Among other changes, Goldwater Nichols streamlined the military chain of command, which now runs from the President through the Secretary of Defense directly to combatant commanders. All 4-star generals are admirals and bypass the service chiefs. The service chiefs were assigned to an advisory role to the President and the Secretary of Defense, as well as given the responsibility for training and equipping personnel for the Unified Combatant Commands. The title of the Goldwater Nichols Act, that is Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of 1986, and its title, that is to organize the Department of Defense and strengthen civilian authority in the Department of Defense and to improve the military advice provided to the President, the National Security Council, and the Secretary of Defense, to place clear responsibility on the commanders of the unified and specified combatant commands for the accomplishment of missions assigned to those commands and ensure that the authority of those commanders is fully commensurate with that responsibility, to encourage attention to the formulation of strategy and to contingency planning, and to provide for more efficient use of defense resources, to improve joint officer management policies, otherwise to enhance the effectiveness of military operations and improve the management and administration of the Department of Defense, and for other purposes. The 99th Congress of the United States has enacted this act. The contributor of this Goldwater Act are the Senator Barry Goldwater and Representative of the HOR William Flint Nichols. Those are the co-sponsors of the Goldwater Nichols Act of 1986. Barry Goldwater is from our What effects this law has on the United States military? This act brought sweeping changes to the Navy. The U.S. military forces were organized. The first successful test of the Goldwater Nichols was the 1989 United States invasion of Panama, codenamed Operation Just Cause, where it functioned exactly as planned, allowing the U.S. commander, Army General Maxwell Reed Thurman, to exercise full control over Marine Corps, Army, Air Force and Navy assets without having to negotiate with the individual services. The chain of command, which is strengthened in accordance with the military advice by this law, under the Goldwater Nichols Act, military advice was centralized in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as opposed to the service chiefs. The chairman was designated as the principal military advisor to the President of the United States, National Security Council, and Secretary of Defense. The Act also established the position of Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and simplified the chain of command. Additionally, the Act states that the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff cannot be representatives from the same service branch. It increased the ability of Chairman to direct overall strategy, but provided greater command authority to unified and specified field commanders. According to the Act, the Chairman may not exercise military command over the Joint Chiefs of Staff or any of the armed forces. And its Section 162B of the Act prescribes that unless otherwise directed by the President, the chain of command to a unified or specified combatant command runs: number 1, from the President to the Secretary of Defense, and number 2, from the Secretary of Defense to the Commander of the combatant command. Interaction of the services. Goldwater Nichols changed the way the services interact. The services themselves organize, train, and equip forces for use for the combatant commanders, CCDRs, and the service chiefs no longer exercise an operational control over their forces. If we see the combatant commanders and their powers, which have been effectively carried out by the service chiefs, who no longer exercise any operational control over their forces, rather than reporting to a service chief's operation, the service component forces support the commander responsible for a specific function. Special operations, strategic and transportation are a geographic region of the globe: Northern, Central, European, Pacific, Southern, and Africa commands. The combatant commanders then field a force capable of employing airland battle doctrine or its successors, using all assets available to the Integrated Unified Action Plan, including the military interagency organizations of the U.S. government, such as USAID and the Department of State, and intelligence agencies. The restructuring afforded a combination of effort, integrated planning, shared procurement, and a reduction or elimination of inter-services rivalry. It also provided unity of command. Conforming with leading military science, individual services changed from relatively autonomous war-fighting entities into organizational and training units responsible for acquisition, modernization, force development, and readiness as a component of the integrated force. The U.S. CENTCOM or U.S. Central Command, for example, would be assigned air ground, naval, marine, and special operations assets to achieve its objectives, not the previously less efficient method of individual services planning, supporting, and fighting the same year. This was successfully demonstrated during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The personnel management. This major effect of the Act is the way it has dramatically changed the personnel management of military officers. Many officers are assigned to joint duty positions, occasionally more than once, and are educated in Department of Defense, joint professional military education schools as part of their career development and progression. For example, in order to be competitive for promotion to general or flag officer, admiral, pay grade 7 or above, NATO of 6, active component colonels, pay grade 06, NATO of 5, Army Marine Corps and Air Force or Navy captains must have completed at least one joint duty assignment, as well as having completed or currently be enrolled in a JPME school that grants JPME level second credit. The procurement which can be shared, and this act allowed the various branches to share technological advances such as stealth and smart weapons quickly and provided other ancillary benefits such as improved interoperability of radios and communications between units and members of different services. Joint implementation of new technology allowed for joint development of sporting doctrine. The Goldwater Nichols Act could be seen as the initial step of the currently ongoing revolution in military affairs. Briefly, we can say RMA, with its concept of network center warfare, and that may be abbreviated as NCW. Now we will know the changes. Since 1986, on October 24, 2002, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld ordered that the functional and regional commanders be referred to not as CINCs, but as competent commanders when applied to unified regional organizations, e.g., for example, US CENTCOM, or commander when talking about specified units such as the US Strategic Command. Rumsfeld said the term CINC was inappropriate, notwithstanding its employment for many decades, because under the United States Constitution, the President is the nation's only Commander-in-Chief. His decision was described as intending to clarify and strengthen the military subordination to civilian government. On November 10, 2015, Senator John McCain announced at a hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee the beginning of a new effort to reconsider and possibly update the Goldwater Nichols Act. On January 4, 2016, the Deputy Secretary of Defense issued a memorandum directing an internal review with the objective to make recommendations for updates or adjustments to organizational relationship and authorities based on 30 years of experience under Goldwater Nichols. On April 5, 2016, Defense Secretary Ash Carter outlined reforms in a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. There are a lot of other things we must have to know about the United States Army. We have to envision the power. We have to compare the power of the America with China, and we will have to see about the structure of the United States Armed Forces, along with its war strategies, and specific the war on terrorism or international war on terrorism.